Hello and welcome to Chatz, a television podcast, Season 11, Part B, Angels in Chatz America. My name is Alan, and I'm joined by my best friend, Magellan.
Hey, how's it going?
Welcome to my holy place, the Holy Podcast Zone, where I instruct people on how to live their lives, I deliver upon them their destiny, and I tell them to just rip up those dang floorboards and see what's inside.
Uh-huh.
How funny would it be if the angel was like, rip up those floorboards, and he did it, and she's like, got him.
Kind of has that tone a little bit.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's more that she's like, all right, you're lazy. But if she went under there and it was like, it just said LOL or something, it was like a piece of paper that said like, you owe me, you just lost your deposit, bye.
Uh-huh.
Oh, man. So, hey guys, we're talking about television. We talk about television every week on the podcast. 2 episodes, and we're right now watching Angels in America, the HBO miniseries, based on the play by Tony Kushner.
Uh-huh.
We watched episodes 3 and 4, which are Millennium Approaches the Messenger and Perestroika Stop Moving. And we've noticed a transition in this week's episodes of Angels in America from the very real, very grounded, as I said last week, very realistic sounding dialogue and storylines of these 5 main characters, actually, into a sort of fantastical, magical realism play that I think would make a lot more tonal sense to shift to this if we were watching this live with live effects. But the use of both the use of CG and leaning into more absurd comedy and less grounded storytelling leads these episodes to feel like they are from a different universe than what we watched last week.
Yeah. Definitely.
John, what did you think about this big shift?
I think the first thing that I'll say is I'm not sure how folks listen to our podcast if they watch. I know some folks probably watch with us. Some folks probably just listen to our commentary and maybe don't watch or watch after or something like that. And I think what I would advise people do is watch first, because there's just a lot going on in these 2 episodes that I don't think we're going to do justice to, since this is our first time watching. And it is so packed with imagery and very kind of poetic dialogue to the point where I feel like a lot of the value that you could get from it comes from a second watch or a third watch or a rewind and watch the scene again sort of approach. And so, this also being a product of just the way that we watch things 2 episodes at a time, maybe made this feel more abrupt too, because I could imagine if you were to watch chapter 3 of Millennium Approaches with the first 2, maybe it would feel like a more gradual transition, since chapter 2 has the bit where the angel's screaming down to Pryor from heaven and the camera zooms out and stuff. There's things like that in chapter 2 that ease you in, but sitting down and starting chapter 3 at the beginning of chapter 3 is very disorienting. And I think for me, I really had to push past my knee-jerk reaction of oh, this is getting weird, it's wacky now, and really make myself think okay, but all of these things are clearly chosen to be this particular way for a reason. And what are those reasons? And so I think we're going to do our best to unpack those things and figure it out. But I do recommend that people also watch for themselves and try to do some of that work themselves too.
Absolutely. Yeah. We always recommend people watch ahead if they can. We try to summarize broadly, if possible, just so if you haven't, or if you haven't, it kind of guides our discussion well, but definitely, to be able to see and experience some of these moments, that we're going to be talking about, will enhance your time with this podcast, I think. This is related. I did watch, about half of How to Survive a Plague, the documentary that you recommended and discussed last week. And I got a lot out of it. I definitely agree with you that it's important that people check it out, even if you already have some familiarity with the AIDS crisis, because it's very much filmed on the ground. I mean, it's all archival footage. It was cut down from hundreds and hundreds of hours of archive footage of real people, of real... of the ACT UP movement happening live as it was occurring and during these protests that, if we see a protest today, we see clips of it on social media, or we see if it goes bad. But sometimes protests are fine and awesome and really helpful. And there's a scene pretty early on where they do a protest inside. I think it's called like the kissing meetup or something like that. And if they totally like show it ending, they're like, yeah, the guy eventually said like, if 3 of you want to talk to us, we'll have a conversation with you. Like to show you that the value of a protest, and also to be informed as a protester and as somebody who believes in a cause, how useful that is when you're trying to make change, is to like inform yourself and arm yourself with knowledge. I think it does a really great job with all of that stuff. But also just briefly, like for the sake of, our current times, which we always like to bring up when we can, we're still in a global pandemic, and many of the people in How to Survive a Plague are still alive today, and including several weird cameos from Dr. Fauci, who was very much involved in all of this, in the sort of like science's response to the AIDS epidemic. These are people who lived through that and now have to accept that when a virus becomes a pandemic and is spread more widely, and you can't put a moral blame on the people for getting it anymore, the government tends to respond a little bit faster. But tragically, even so, they still have dragged their feet in various countries in various ways. So it just makes me think about, like, what are these people living today thinking about all of this stuff? I mean, it's just survive this, and they see this thing happening around them with COVID, and they're like, this shit again? Like, really? We're just doing it again. Well,
and I think that the reason to watch something like How to Survive a Plague and think about the literal realities of the AIDS crisis, the value of doing that when you watch Angels in America is that as the show becomes less connected with reality and becomes more fantastical or magical, or impressionistic or whatever, having that grounding is really helpful. Especially because, like, this play is trying to make a point about how politics operate in the United States, and it's very preoccupied. I read this AV Club review that was talking about how it's not just a sort of period piece of the 80s, but it's really preoccupied with, like, the broad scope of American history, politics, religion, the place of those things in our entire history. And, we have seen over the course of the past year, the way in which politics and religion and those enduring tensions have had an effect on how we talk about and respond to COVID. Like, you would think that something like COVID would not have been politicized to the extent that it has been, but that's not the case. And it operates differently than how AIDS was politicized. But nonetheless, I think this play is ultimately trying to say that, like, politics is an essential part of how we think about crises like this, and can get in the way of addressing them.
Yeah, and part of the reason why I felt a little bit of burnout in watching How to Survive a Plague was, like, I do want to finish it and like experience that, but I was specifically watching to, add to my knowledge, as we always try to do, for this discussion. And there are, the first episode, especially episode 3 that we watched, has quite a few discussions of politics and the new right and liberalism in America and race in America and all of that stuff. But then, episode 4 kind of, like, really leans into the magical realism and the religious symbolism and all of that stuff, to the point where it felt like, what is watching How to Survive a Plague going to help me with understanding that part? But also they, like, went to a Catholic church and laid down on the floor and, like, yelled to stop killing them because the Catholic Church condemned the use of condoms. Like, religion has always been there. It's not to say that it isn't, but I just think that specifically, like, the borderline comedic tone that these episodes start to take on kind of does not mesh very well with the politics, if that makes sense. But let's talk about that, and we'll start with The Messenger, episode 3. Again, directed by Mike Nichols and written by Tony Kushner. This episode aired December 10th of 2003, And Magellan, can you tell me what happened in episode 3?
In this episode, Roy Cohn tells Joe how he was responsible for having the Rosenbergs, an American couple suspected of being Soviet espionage agents, executed. Wasn't one of them actually a spy also? Well,
I believe so.
I think Ethel Rosenberg actually was a spy.
She's going to red hell.
Can you look that up real quick?
Mm-hmm.
Fantasy begins to seep into reality when soon after a dead Ethel Rosenberg appears to Cohn and, as classic retribution, makes fun of his slow death. Joe sees Lewis in Central Park at night and he touches Lewis's face. The angel crashes through the ceiling and tells Pryor there is work to be done. That summary is from IMDb. I don't think it's very well written, but that gives you a sense of some of the things that are going on in the episode.
Apparently their children... when they grew up years later, Robert, one of their children, said, "We were the children of communist spies," but I think it was specifically regarding their dad. The case is complicated, is part of the issue there.
Mm-hmm.
But I've never fully understood or read about the Rosenberg case. I think for the sake of this episode, it's actually pretty valuable, because it causes Joe to have this crisis of conscience, like you were talking about, where Joe is going through a ton of growth in these episodes, a ton, and it's fascinating. But at the same time, he's learning about Roy and learning that he's probably one of the most evil men in American history, definitely up there with some of the worst, and is very proud of it. And honestly, man, I just can't see these Roy Cohn scenes anymore without thinking of our former president. And I know I'm beating a dead horse a little bit, but just the way he talks about not only do I want this treatment, but I want other people to not have it and stuff like that, just really turned me around on Roy to the point where it almost passed through Al Pacino's ability to play this scumbag to where I was I know you're great and you're doing amazing acting, but I hate you. You know what I mean? So I want to talk first about the sort of Joe and also Roy Cohn stuff, because Roy starts to, after this point, after these couple scenes here, once he's brought into the hospital, takes on a storyline of his own along with Belize. But I think that's a good place to start on. So Joe and Roy's plot first starts in Roy Cohn's apartment, and Joe's there to tell Roy that he's not interested in going to Washington. And we get this sort of picture of Roy Cohn as not only controlling and lacking empathy, but willing to manipulate even his closest allies, no matter at any cost, and admit that he's doing it. He's just so nakedly the worst. And so, this scene especially, it's Joe is trying to navigate his own morals and saying at one point that he loves Roy. He straight up admits it. And the fact that they still haven't consummated their relationship yet complicates this as well. But I'm curious. So what did you think about the Roy Cohn stuff here? Because we've kind of turned to him as sort of a villain of the series in a way.
Yeah, I think that Roy Cohn is a really interesting figure to have in this play, since, like I said, it's so occupied with the notion of politics and this idea that there aren't. Lewis in his conversation with Belize makes the point, and I'd love to talk about that conversation more, but makes the point that there are no angels in America, that there's no sort of sacred tradition or really any sort of core to Americanness, but rather life in this country especially is really just about the kind of practicalities of cutthroat politics, and the people who make it are the people who recognize that and are brutally honest about it. And Roy Cohn is that person to a T. He doesn't care about morality. He doesn't care about right or wrong. He just cares about power, basically, and about achieving the things that he wants to achieve. And I thought that this was a really interesting it felt like the final conversation between Joe and Roy Cohn almost. I think it really works as, Joe comes to Roy Cohn because he wants some sort of reassurance or comfort or forgiveness or something. There's something that he wants from Roy. He wants understanding from him because he also still wants to believe this ideology and this line of work that he's devoted himself to and given himself to for years and has been his only kind of identity as he's been denying parts of himself and trying to figure out who he was. He wants to believe, I think, that was still worth it and that there's still something good and salvageable about that. And it's pretty brutal for Roy to be like, no, there isn't. Like, I'm not a nice person. You want to be nice. That's not me. Like, fuck you. Get out of here. And by the way, the thing that I'm most proud of is this like incredibly immoral thing that I did where, and I just looked this up to verify, and you were right that it seemed like Julius Rosenberg, whatever it is they were up to, he was more involved or solely involved or something. But obviously, yeah, right. It's very, very messy. But Roy Cohn brags about secretly making calls to the judge to get Ethel Rosenberg's sentence moved from just life in prison to actual execution on the electric chair. And Roy Cohn basically is like, yeah, and you'd call that murder, I guess, but like, I did it. It was for my fame, and it was because I hate communists, and it was because I wanted to do it, and I did it, and I'm proud of it, and I'm going to stay proud of it. And I think that, you know, this scene really works as Joe's sort of like final moment of disillusionment with who he thought he wanted to be, so that he can go and try to figure out with Lewis or somebody else like who he actually is.
Yeah, I the part of the reason I wanted to start on all of this stuff, besides the fact that Pacino's acting here is incredible, and I just really wanted to get into it, is, you know, you can kind of English class this a little bit and say that Roy Cohn in this play is meant to signify the American ideal, or like the rotten core, if you will, of the American right, and specifically like where the political right is at this point in the 1980s. Because no matter how strong and informed and well mobilized, you know, the anti-AIDS movement is, you still have people like this who are happy and confident to shut things down at any possible place, whether it be against the communists or against homosexuals or against what have you. These are people in power who will refuse. And as he says, like, I have a heart that doesn't bleed. I have an iron heart. He very frequently references the fact that his body is impenetrable. And that was a very common way of thinking and discussing and talking about yourself at this time for people like Roy, is to be like, well, I don't get sick. And like, you know, as he says in episode 1, I'm not a homosexual and I don't have AIDS. I simply have cancer. So that's why it's so cathartic. Not cathartic. I don't know. Maybe like my empathy is off here because I hate this man, but seeing him in the hospital in episode 4 and like the way that he has to hoard this precious medicine, and knowing historically that AZT is like not the best medicine for AIDS, kind of like gives me a relief after all of this, the stress that this scene caused.
Why is that?
Well, so Roy Cohn sucks, and it would be very easy in like a dramatic retelling of this to be like, and then Joe kills Roy, right? Like something like that. But what it actually works out to be is more realistic, which is that he's under the care of a queer black man and being given medicine, which at the time is so rare and so precious to millions. And they said like he's one of 30 people who has that much AZT. But you know, as they talk about in How to Survive a Plague, AZT is like not the ideal AIDS treatment. It at the time was. But very quickly, people realize that it has so many side effects that some people can't survive.
From what I understand, it seems like it's more measure to prevent contracting HIV as opposed to like it being a treatment for once you already have AIDS.
Yeah. Exactly. So it's like he has all this money and power, and yet the best thing he can get is not going to keep him alive much longer.
Yeah. And I think the sort of damning thing. Sorry, did you have more to say about that? I feel like I cut you off.
No, that's it. I just was trying to explain why I felt that stuff was cathartic to me.
Well, is it sort of like he's getting what he deserves kind of thing? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, honestly. I mean, he's writhing on the floor and talking about how America does not, but well, by the end of episode 4, just to jump ahead a lot, he's saying like America is not for people who are sick. They can't support people like me.
Well, I think the sort of irony and like if we want to call it justice or something of that is like the reason that there isn't a more effective drug is because of the work of conservatives like Roy Cohn who like don't have the political will to take care of this issue, right? And like put money and care into finding a better treatment. And so he wants to like hoard what's available for himself. But the reality of it is like there isn't better medicine because there isn't like more funding or government effort in making there be a better medicine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It could be there, as they say, like they have a similar or a better treatment in like convenience stores in Japan or over the counter in Japan. Like,
yeah, I it's interesting what you were saying about Roy Cohn representing this kind of like dark heart of conservatism, and yeah, it really is hard not to compare his character to Donald Trump. And if people are sort of annoyed by us bringing up Trump, I don't really care, but you know, that is what we're doing. But it's, you know, when Trump came into office and then during his presidency, there's all this conversation about the ways in which he was unprecedented and boorish and the horrible things that he says and believes. But like, I think what this Roy Cohn character demonstrates, and probably what Tony Kushner would say, is that Trump's ideology was not anything new in 2016 or 2020. It was just the sort of like unmasked version of what had been around since 1980. And, you know, people like Joe Pitt want to believe that what conservatism is smiling Ronald Reagan, but what it actually is the sort of like amoral Roy Cohns of the world or Donald Trumps of the world. That's at least what the play is asserting. Yeah,
exactly. And they're saying that in this scene too, because eventually Roy is just straight up. I think this is the term to use correctly here. He's gaslighting Joe and saying, you know, Joe's like, "Oh, you're sick because you have cancer." And he's like, "What are you talking about? I don't have cancer. What made you think I have that? I'm so healthy." And then he says, "I love you, sweet baby Joe. That's why I'm so rough on you." Yeah, and then he
starts like hitting him or trying to push him around and stuff. It's really gross.
Yeah, it's full on abuse, and people like Joe are just like subject to so much of it that in a lot of ways, like Joe does want to be controlled. He wants to be guided and pointed in a direction. He's kind of like a loaded weapon without a target in a way. So it takes him finding eventually later in episode 4, I guess, Lewis, to be like, okay, I can like support and nourish this emotion that you've been having for a while and not make you feel crazy. Whereas we get these like tight zoom ins in the Roy Cohn scene where he's like, "I'll always be here waiting for you," and then he just fucking falls on his face like this guy is dying, and Joe almost strikes him too, which I thought was really powerful. He doesn't, and that's the part where that great line, "So many laws, find one you can break, Joe." Joe is defined by like wanting to have a moral compass and moral direction, but the whole world is like, no, that's not going to work for you anymore.
It's interesting. It's interesting across both episodes to see Roy Cohn revel in other people being as ugly as he is. Like when he sort of lights up at the possibility of Joe punching him in the face, or in this,
or Belize calling him a
and then he's like, "Okay, now you can have a bottle of my pills." And I wonder what's at play there. I guess it's sort of Roy Cohn like feeling justified in believing that there is no like pure moral goodness in the world, and if nobody's moral, then it doesn't matter that I'm not. But if other people can be moral, then it's a failing. Like my whole life has been just as evil as everybody says it is.
Exactly. And so I want to roll it back now, because I know we both got a lot out of another scene that was actually right towards the beginning of this episode. We're getting more of the character of Belize in the episodes.
I was happy about that.
Me too. We had literally just complained last week that like this character gets to walk in and out of the storyline and not matter, and the play is like, no, that's not how it works. There's a total of like 3 side characters, and they play everybody in this. In this, it's Jeffrey Wright, Emma Thompson, and Meryl Streep play basically everybody that they interact with who is not. I think there's like a police officer in episode 4 that Meryl Streep's character interacts with, but that's it. Nobody else matters. And so Belize is sitting at a diner with Lewis talking about, at first talking about like love and stuff, but then Lewis just starts going off on this rant that I'm so curious what you thought about this. Talking about this idea that, and he actually brings up the title of the play. He says that there's no angel in America, that we don't have a sort of religious identity or like a cultural identity the way that so many other countries do, with much longer tales of history. And our identity is defined by the day-to-day of politics. And the whole time, Belize is like ordering food, talking, thinking about other things. He's not making eye contact until eventually he's like, yeah, the reason I'm not engaging is because I don't agree and you're stupid. Yeah. Like, it's just, or they have like a really interesting intellectual debate here.
Yeah, I thought that this scene was really fascinating, because Belize, like, I think Jeffrey Wright does an incredible job with the character of Belize, doing this very sort of like simmering, understated thing that he does with Lou and with Roy later on, because you can see sort of like how much Belize just completely disagrees with everything that Lewis is saying, but is disagreeing through gestures or through silence rather than arguing about it. But yeah, essentially the point that Lewis is trying to make, it's very convoluted and muddled, and there's a few things that come out of it. I think the first thing is something that we were saying last week to a certain extent, which is him talking about this sort of problem of like moderate liberalism, like the inherent danger that it poses, because he talks about like how moderate liberalism is all about this politics of tolerance. And he essentially says like, fuck tolerance, I want power, because what AIDS is demonstrating is the limits of tolerance, and that underneath tolerance, there's still hatred. And I think that that's true. And then he sort of makes this point about, like you were saying, America is so young and so pluralistic that like there isn't really, he's saying like leftists get too caught up in wanting to appeal to things like freedom or equality or these sort of like, you know, very American buzzwords. He calls them fetishes in his rant here.
Yeah.
And he's like, all of that stuff is BS. Like there isn't really any sort of core ideology or core identity of America at all. It's just this sort of collective struggle for power in this like kind of patchwork society. And then he makes the point of like even something like race actually is just a political tool, and doesn't have any sort of inherent societal weight or function beyond the way that we use it in politics. And Belize is like, okay, I don't know about that, buddy.
Belize tries finishing one of his sentences, and he's like, no, I actually really, like, I've kind of had, not conversations exactly like this before, but conversations where you're, like, ranting about something, and the other person tries, like, showing that they're listening, but they miss the point. You're like, no, you know, hold on. Okay, like, not to in any way drag our friend Jim, but sometimes Jim will do this thing where he'll like talk about something a lot, and then you'll try to invest, and he'll be like, no, but what I'm saying is this, and you're like, no, but I'm listening. Like I love the conversational interplay happening here. Also because of the subject matter, I think it's fascinating, and the fact that the show does, or the scene does address the fact that like Belize is a black man who's being told that ostensibly that like race is a tool. It's not really about race here. And he's just got like his eyebrows are getting more and more furrowed throughout the scene. But I agree that I find Lewis's perspective here really interesting as well. And I do agree with a lot of what he's saying.
Yeah, and I'm curious to see how, like, this is the title of the play, right? Angels in America. And so it is calling into question, the play is calling into question, like, is there something in America? Is there some kind of like core guiding ideology or some better version of this? Or is Lewis right that it's this very like pessimistic political squabbling over every single thing?
We're just all fighting over scraps for eternity.
And I guess we'll see where the play lands by the end of it, right?
Right. And then they also turn this conversation to sort of talk about Pryor and how he misses Pryor a lot. And Belize kind of gives him some guff for that. Something that's nice about this being a televised adaptation is that this conversation is intercut and it like becomes a voiceover over Pryor being examined medically by Emma Thompson's nurse character, because talking about how like people, gay people suffering under this crisis don't have political capital, they don't have political power, and meanwhile you're watching a man like take his clothes off in front of a doctor and like be like very vulnerable in front of her as she's just like cold and medically examining him. I think that actually works really, really well.
And I don't even know that she's being cold. Like, I think there's meant to be some kind of intimacy there, I think.
Well, I think in their conversation also there definitely is. I mean, she touches his hand, which was something I was surprised by, because when you're actually getting the focus on that examination scene, it's a little bit more, I guess the word I was looking for more was sterile. It's just like the whole like being touched by somebody with gloves is an uncomfortable feeling, no matter who you are or what the context is. But when they actually have a conversation about like, she's like, you're going to live for years probably. Like, you're fairly healthy for someone with no immune system. She's like the most honest doctor or nurse that I've ever like seen. She's ready to get him a therapist and whatever. And he's just such a ball of stress and anxiety, and that's like really nice to have this character who is like empathetic with you. But then that breaks down when I think first he starts hearing her speak Hebrew, and he's really confused, and it's pretty funny because you get to hear Emma Thompson's like flawless Hebrew, and he's like, why are you doing that? Like, he basically says like, stop bullying me, that's not fair. And then she's like, what are you saying? And then in one of the most bizarre moments of CG in either of these episodes, as he's putting his jacket back on, the floor between them in the nurse's office opens up, and the Torah pops out in like some like aughts CG looking ass, and the words light up on fire, and you get to just watch that actor like look at some CG and go and then it goes away. It's just like, what are we going for here? I guess Pryor is having his like religious and that's the book that they talk about later, or that's because they talk about the text that he's given by the angel.
Yeah, I think what this play does really, I can't remember how much of his actual interactions with the angel are in the first episode. I think just when he sees her come through the ceiling, right? And then the episode ends.
Yeah, it ends on that, yes.
I think what this play is doing pretty deftly is making everything in Pryor's visions connect to things that have happened to him during the play, so that it's entirely plausible to read it as him hallucinating or read it as some kind of actual divine experience, because all of this preoccupation with like Hebrew and Judaism clearly seems to be influenced by his relationship with Lewis, and the fact that the angel is Emma Thompson says something about the sort of feeling of like reliance and intimacy, but weird, distant intimacy that he's been feeling with the nurse. So yeah. And I think he's just trying to make, like at the beginning of the miniseries, Pryor doesn't really strike you as someone who is particularly religious or interested in religion. But as he's dying, he becomes more preoccupied with what is the afterlife and what is the sort of purpose of this world and why does it work the way that it does, and is there a way that I can make sense of these things, or feel like there's some purpose to what I'm going through other than it being this sort of like just random tragedy.
Yeah, and maybe this is up for debate, but when we come back to the diner scene and they're leaving and they're talking about like, Pryor Walter is dying, and then Belize is like, no, you also wish you were dying right now. You like wish that this was happening to you, and you want to sort of take on. Yeah,
Lewis is like, I broke the copy machine at work the other day, or like I broke my glasses.
Yeah, I'm a huge failure. I'm dying, and then Belize is like, yeah, you wish that this was happening. Your ex is actually the one who's dying. They say to look up at the sky, and the sky is turning mauve. Like things, the fantasy is turning into the reality. And what I was saying would be debatable is like Pryor's visions can all be read, and so can Harper's whole situation, if you want to call it that, in these episodes, can be read as hallucinations. Very simply, you don't have to say anything weird about that. But like, they're affecting them in real ways. So is this still magical realism, or are these just visions, I guess, is my question for you. Because if it's magical realism, then it is happening in the text of the show. Like, in the universe of the series, these things are real. But if it's a vision and then they wake up and it's not quote unquote real, then it's not magical realism. I guess this is just like a genre thing I've been thinking of.
I don't really think that. I think that everything that's happening is happening in their minds. I don't think that means that they're hallucinations necessarily. I think there could be something like supernatural to it, but it isn't actually affecting the real world.
But the sky is turning mauve.
Yeah, but like it could just look that way because of the way the sun is hitting it or something. I don't know. I'm not really that. Maybe it is going to turn out that like, yeah, heaven is seeping into earth or something like that. But I don't really think that's happening, and I don't really care if it is, I guess, because I think what matters is the ways in which the characters are like leaning into these visions or whatever to better understand themselves in ways that they couldn't otherwise. Like Pryor's going through an incredibly complex experience and trying to make sense of like his beliefs in spirituality and religion and just like cosmology and stuff. And he's going through thought experiments to do so. And maybe he's not consciously doing that, but you know, this is just a way for him to process everything that's going on. So I don't really care if it's real or not. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But yeah.
Completely valid. No, I just, you know, I'm a big fan of magical realism as a genre, and I like thinking about like where that intersects with other genres, but it's ultimately not the intent of this series to make you go like, is it real? Like, of course, it's real in the universe, and I'm not trying to cinema sins in and be like, this part doesn't make consistent sense with the part where he saw an angel have sex with him. Like, no, it's real. I think saying just it's real enough and it's real in their heads is a good enough answer. The other major, and I don't have a ton of notes on this one, but the other major visions that Pryor has, he spends a lot of these episodes sweating, waking up in a cold sweat in bed, and like in the middle of the night. And one of those, right at the top of this episode, he's woken by the first Pryor Walter, one of the other Pryor Walters in his ancestry, who is in black and white. And I believe one of the ghosts is played by the guy who plays Dumbledore. Pretty sick, right? And once you know that, you keep seeing it and you're like, that's Dumbledore. He shaved his beard. And it ends up being two. It's Pryor Walters 1 and 2, who are from different eras of time. This definitely would be cool to see on a stage, right? This is like ghosts appearing to tell you about your life. But basically they're saying, you know, we died of plagues too. We didn't die from what one of them later is like, oh, he's a sodomist. And the other one's like, no, be cool. It's 1980. It's fine. I thought that was just really funny. And they bring a good comedic lightness to this. But this is definitely where I was like, is this the same Angels in America that we were watching last week? Like now we have these like ghosts from the past talking about like their way that they died. What did you get? What was your overall takeaway from those two ghosts, those two fun ghosts? Besides the fact that we should also probably play them in the adaptation.
I think that's another moment of Pryor trying to figure out what's going on. Like he tries to understand how this particular illness is positioned in history, what his relationship is with past generations. Is there anything about like the plague that can help him to understand what's happening to him? Yeah. So I think that's what's going on there.
It also is grief processing too, or relationship grief processing, because in the second major scene with them, he sees a Fred Astaire performance, but it's actually Lewis, and they dance together to the song Moon River. It's a beautiful and it's really beautiful, and I started crying. So good with the piano and then it's just like tender romance. They don't get to see a lot of like that kind of tenderness in this series. And the fact that it happens in a hallucination or in a dream sequence is like interesting. Because they can't be together in real life. But again, this is definitely one of those, like, you gotta watch it. We can tell you, like, and then Lewis appears as Fred Astaire and dances to to Moon River with a dying Pryor Walter in his bed, but, like, it looks incredible. It's really well shot.
I think everything about Pryor's story is really wrestling with this idea of, like, you know, there's no reason that this is happening to him, that he's dying of the illness.
It's not a moral failing. He's not a bad person for
it. Just happened. And I think he's really trying to square that and understand that. And I don't know where the play is going to land. But I would imagine that was something that Tony Kushner is thinking about, and that people who are experiencing the AIDS crisis and dying of AIDS are thinking about, is like, why is this happening to us? What can we look to understand this? Do we find answers in history? Do we find answers in science and religion, in love? And, you know, there isn't an answer, because it just is happening, because sometimes things happen, you know?
And you have to exist and be present and like acknowledge that, you know, you can't retreat into your fantasy or your dream forever. But sometimes your dreams are going to tell you what to think and what to believe. And
I think I found it really powerful, just to kind of preview something that's brought up in the second episode, where one of the things that the angel says to Pryor is that humanity is like cursed with the virus of time, and like the play trying to deal with this thing of life changing and things changing is inherent to like all of the suffering that we experience in our lives. And that being a central part of this too, that like AIDS is a condition that like happens to you over time, right? It's not like you get it and then the next day you're dead. It's like you feel your body fall apart. There are these opportunistic infections that happen, and you like watch it happen to you. And so I think that is something that he's wrestling with too, is like the relationship between human life and just time and change as a concept and all of that.
It's really well done. The other scenes from this episode that I feel like I want to mention, but I don't have as much resonance with, all kind of conclude in the second one. So we can like touch on a couple more of these, and then I really want to get into more of the angel and the Pryor Walter stuff. It seems in this one, like Harper has found herself in Antarctica with Mr. Lies. They're having a great time. She loves the snow. It tastes like ozone. It tastes like the salty iron taste of blood in the air. And Mr. Lies, again played by Jeffrey Wright, doing a really interesting vocal affect that I like, but I can't tell what he's going for, other than like he sounds like he's in an advertisement.
I think he's just going for like, I'm a blues man kind of thing. Yeah.
He tells her to respect the delicate ecology of your illusions. Like, make it clear that this isn't real, Harper. You're hallucinating a lot of this. But we don't get the reveal of where that.
Well, another point that he's making is Harper's trying to sort of, she's like really happy to be in Antarctica, and she's thinking about the sort of life that she can have there, and like, I can raise the baby, and like maybe I could find someone to love me here, and this and that. And he's basically saying like, well, you chose to come to Antarctica because it's like a cold place where you could be numb and not feel anything. And now you're sort of bringing in like all of these hopes and aspirations for it. And like, why are you talking about the baby? Because you made that up. So like, just do the fantasy that you wanted to have of like being in this cold place where nothing could hurt you because you can't feel anything. And I think it's really cool to watch Harper as a character, even though we don't really get a lot of her in these two episodes, unfortunately, to watch her realize that like she doesn't really want to be in Antarctica. Like she actually doesn't want to be
Oh, yeah.
sort of cold and protected and unfeeling. She wants, to find love and to have a life and be close to somebody. It's just that she was made to feel afraid of those things and sad about those things because of what's been going on with her and Joe.
And I can definitely somewhat relate, or at least empathize with a character who, like, will retreat to the fantasy and then say, this is just the way my life is now. And it's like, no, you're still in it. And she says in the end of towards the end of this part, like, I'm going to go find the Eskimo. And he's like, there are no Eskimos in Antarctica. That's like a fake thing in fiction that you read. And she's like, no, I'm going to go find one. And then she like walks off and he just plays the oboe, which I thought was funny because the oboe is the instrument used at the beginning of the show's intro. And we learn later that that's none of this is what it starts to break down. But that's basically what that one is in here. There is a very funny scene, a very interesting scene, where Joe's mother, played by Meryl Streep, arrives. She thinks she's in Brooklyn. She after a little while of talking to a homeless woman, realizes that she's actually in Bronx.
And I think that's Emma Thompson, by the way. Yeah.
Is that Emma Thompson? Oh, yeah, no, sorry, the homeless person. Yes, that is Emma Thompson. Correct. I confirmed that as well. This is so funny because it's again the like old generation being like, why can't you just do the thing I want you to do? Like, imagine being bossy to a homeless person. It boggles the mind to imagine the arrogance.
So I'm sorry that you're psychotic, but make an effort.
Yes. And the person just like, and then the person starts talking to themselves, and like it kind of becomes complicated who's talking, and it sounds like she's yelling at herself like, "Ugh, stop eating" or whatever. And it sounds like she is Joe's mother's thoughts being vocalized. It's just really it's pretty goofy, and also just the joke of like, can you please tell me where Brooklyn is? And she's like, I don't know what that is. I don't know what anything is. And then later she's like, you're in the Bronx. She's like, can you just tell me where the Mormon Service Center is? And she's like, yeah, it's down the street 3 blocks. And she's like, what the? She's like, yeah, they got they have free movies and they let you stay all day. It's really nice there. Anyway, I thought that was really fun. And it's again like an opportunity to use the angels in various ways. I do, maybe we can save this for the second one, but like, what's the deal with just using these same characters? Is this a play saving budget thing, or is this a intentional, like these are characters influencing lives kind of thing? But we'll put a pin in that because I want to get to that second one really bad. We talked about the Joe and Roy stuff. We talked about the ghost stuff. Joe and Louis do briefly reunite in the park, and this begins their whole flirtation. I love the moment where Joe just wants to touch his face, and he says, I'm going to hell for this. Just for touching a face. Just for, like, which is, like, intimate. I know that. But I love also that Louis is like, big deal. You think you can do any worse than... Because he goes, I'm going to hell for this. And then Louis goes, big deal. You think you can do any worse than New York City? Which is brutal. And then they finally do a little kissy kiss, and then Louis invites him home. I'm a really terrible person, Louis. I don't think I deserve being loved. Establishing that Joe is still with a person who's literally like let's get in bed tonight is still like, no, I don't. This is bad. I'm going to hell for this. That's his crisis of conscience. And then this one ends with Pryor again waking up in the middle of the night. His like ceiling light is bending backwards. He thinks it's a big bird outside, and an angel cracks open his ceiling and tells him, "Greetings, prophet. The great messenger has arrived." And it's Emma Thompson. She's the angel of America. It's a dense episode. It's pretty freaking dense, and the next one is more dense. So I want to get right into it. John, did you have any stray notes on this one?
I think let's just get into the second half, and they'll come up as they come up, probably.
Hell yeah. All right. We'll be right back to discuss Perestroika. Stop moving. Hey folks, this is Alan taking a break from the episode discussions to read some emails that we received regarding last week's episode of Angels in Chatz America. These both came to us from friend of the podcast and manager of the Chatz subreddit, which of course you can find at reddit.com/r/chatspod, Nick, brother at Infinite War. Nick says, "Hey guys, great episode. Thank you for the great discussion." Thank you, Nick, for listening. Watching this show has reminded me quite a bit of the other similar era HBO show, 6 Feet Under. You want complicated romances, both straight and gay? It's got it. and the black romantic partner is actually around for quite a bit, so they don't fall into the token helper character you complained about. And of course, it's very much about dealing with death. Every episode. Worth noting here, Nick, if you haven't listened up to this point, we've learned that Belize does become a much more fleshed out character. It just took him 2 episodes to do so. This show, coming back to Angels in America, is so hard to pin down on its religiousness. Or Nick actually says religiosity. I was an edit on my part. Without looking it up, I assume the writer is both gay and cares very much about his faith. These are both true things, Nick. You are correct in that assumption. Joe's confession to his mother and her dismissal is so realistic that it's actually painful to watch. My brother-in-law is gay, but it's amazing how much my in-laws, who are very conservative Catholics, basically pretend that they don't know. And then ironically, in Nick's opinion, he's become more religious, becoming somewhat judgmental of others. I have decided to balance the show's darkness. I'm going to listen to the Book of Mormon soundtrack in between episodes. I know before on the Chatz Discord I've suggested Angels in the Outfield, but I guess now it's cemented that I need to watch How to Survive a Plague as the chaser to Angels in America. Keep it up, and I enjoy the transition from a miniseries about a virus spreading death and judgment to a miniseries about a virus spreading 99% death and the battle of good versus evil, referring to the fact that we're going to be covering The Stand next on Chatz. But yeah, Nick, I love this email. I'm really glad we got an email in. I'm very happy that people are engaging with the show again. In the email format, we obviously have the wonderful Chatz Discord and the subreddit, but it's nice to have an email segment. I haven't gotten to do one of these in what feels like quite a while. But yeah, regarding the show's darkness, I think How to Survive a Plague was a great chaser with this one because it's bringing real life history and just live action footage to this dramatized story. And you'll actually notice that a lot of the time in discussing like these episodes this week, refer to it as the play. We're talking about the episodes of the play. And I think that's in part because it just feels like we're watching a long play at this point. You know, the weirdness and the surrealness definitely make more sense in a play than they do in what we traditionally consider dramatic television. And maybe that's something worth having as a discussion, but that's kind of where I ended up landing on it. And I have met people like your brother-in-law who, you know, may be out or to some people and gay, but also conservative in other ways, or more religious in some ways, actually, as you've said, because those things they don't have to be in conflict. I myself am a queer Christian. Like, it's not completely out of the picture for that to happen. Did send a follow-up email, a brief one, that says, regarding the hiding of diagnosis of AIDS, I'll bring up that Isaac Asimov actually died from the disease, but it wasn't publicly known until years after his death. He got it following a blood transfusion during heart surgery, and the stigma of it meant that his family didn't want people to know until quite a bit later. That's completely news to me, Nick. I truly had no idea that Isaac Asimov had AIDS. You learn something every day. And yes, the hiding of diagnoses is a very serious and tragically prevalent issue, especially at that time, you know. But we press on. We have some very interesting discussions ahead, and I'm going to take it back to Magellan and Alan for their discussion of Perestroika, Stop Moving.
Welcome back to Angels in Chatzmerica. The second episode we watched this week was part 1 of the second half of Angels in America, which is called Perestroika, and this part itself is titled Stop Moving. As with the entire miniseries, it was directed by Mike Nichols and written by Tony Kushner. This particular chapter first aired on December 15th, 2003. Alan, what happened in Perestroika, Stop Moving?
Well, Magellan, I'm glad you asked. Lewis, having forsaken his dying lover prior, returns to his apartment with the married lawyer Joe in tow. Roy Cohn's doctor admits him to the hospital, and once there, Cohn meets nurse Norman Belize Arriaga. We did not know his name before. A drag queen who also happens to be Pryor's good friend. Although Belize despises Cohn for his belligerence and narrow-mindedness, he educates the vitriolic Cohn about life in the hospital. Amazingly, Cohn is more upset that his hospital room telephone doesn't have a hold button than the fact that he has AIDS. Late at night, Cohn demands his own supply of AZT, a drug unavailable to most. That's a terrible sentence, IMDb. Come on, get it together, summaries. I'm going to find better summaries next week, don't worry. Basically, there's more relationship drama. Roy and Belize become begrudging friends. Parker turns out to be in the park, Harper turns out to be in the park. I always get her name. I forget if it's Harper or Parker. Parker, Pete, I need to get me photos of Peter Parker. Yes, Harper turns out to be in the park, freezing, biting down a tree, and she gets taken home by the police. Joe's mom comes home also and looks for Joe, and he's not there. He spends 3 weeks with Lewis, an unconscionable, unbelievable 3 weeks of passionate lovemaking. And then the angel explains the entire lore of the universe and America to Prior Walter. It's great. I had a good time. This episode's awesome. Did you like it?
Yeah. I mean, I think what I said in the first half still applies, that like it's hard to appreciate on your first viewing because it's very dense. And I think there are particularly moments in this one where it definitely feels like it would have made more sense on stage as a play. I read this really brief AV Club review that mostly I was looking for like a literary critique of the miniseries, but it really was mostly like a how entertaining is this kind of critique. But it makes the point that I think is valid that like the scenes where Emma Thompson is the angel don't make as much sense in film because like film is just so real, you know? It's hard to communicate like artifice or hard to communicate that something is meant to be funny. And so Emma Thompson, I think, is playing the angel in a way that if she was on stage, it would be pretty silly. And it fluctuates between silly and like kind of scary in this one in a way that I think is odd. But overall, I think that this episode is pretty cool and does some good stuff.
I have an easy lowball. I have a couple of lowball plot lines that we can discuss before getting into the angel stuff. How about that? I'll do that.
Okay,
I'll do that.
sure.
I'll do you a solid if you do me a plasma. So Joe and Lewis open this episode in a dark apartment, which is Lewis's apartment, which he describes as messy but not dirty. Right, which ends up having symbolic relevance as well. And this scene is very intense. It's very sexual, very sexually charged. Initially, Joe is like, "This is wrong. I'm sorry. I came here and I should leave." And he goes in for a hug, and Lewis starts smelling his cologne and asks what cologne it is. He says that's very heterosexual high school boy, which if this was today, he would have just said it's Axe body spray. You would have nailed it. But it's Fabergé. And he talks about how, smell particles are the other person going into your nose, and it gets more, I guess, erotic from there. And then he kind of like brings Joe in, and then they end up starting a bit of a relationship. A little, there has to be like a fun French word that I can't think of for what they're doing here.
a tryst.
Yeah, sure. There you go. I love the way this scene was shot. I love that it was so dark. I like needed all of my room to be completely dark to appreciate this scene because the light is entirely diegetic. It seems like it's coming from outside the window and nothing else. I like the sort of visual storytelling there, but it's also contrasted hard with like right as this is a lot and made me blush a little bit, but right as Lewis goes for Joe's genitals, we cut to Prior, who has like screamed awake in the middle of the night again because he had an orgasm in the middle of the night. He had a wet dream, which was interesting. But that cuts to him calling Belize on the phone, and we get a little portrait of Belize in the hospital.
I feel like there's more to talk about with the Joe and Lewis stuff, isn't there?
Yeah. I was doing the like literally into the next scene though. I don't know what the next major scene. Well, I guess they do jump forward to them. Is it just them straight to 3 weeks later, or is there anything between that?
Yeah, I think so. There's like a later scene where Pryor's talking to the angel, and then it cuts to Lewis and Joe in bed together, and Joe wakes up like gives Lewis this look of like, "Oh, hey there, sexy," and then Lewis starts right in on this question of basically like how can you be religious and democratic at the same time? Like how can you be a Mormon but also believe in a society where people have a variety of different religions and opinions and stuff like that? And they kind of get into this quasi-political thing. But the reason I wanted to stick with them is because, I think the scenes of Lewis and Joe in the first few episodes are meant to be very cute for lack of a better word. Like, they're supposed to be these kind of charming, budding love sort of scenes. But then it feels like their relationship kind of takes a turn in this episode, and it maybe turns out to be not everything that Joe is expecting it to be. So I'm curious what you thought of that part of it.
I actually wanted to open that scene's discussion by saying how funny it is to like wake up on week 3 of like being with this guy, and he's already awake well before you, like sipping his coffee, just watching you sleep. And the first thing he asks you is like, "Is secular humanism real?" And you're like, I'm not awake yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is really a control play. I think, like I was saying in the last discussion, maybe Joe is just like switching out another person to control him right now.
Yeah.
And he wants to have that guidance because he tells Lewis that he loves him again.
Yeah.
He just keeps doing this. He told Roy he loves him,
Mm-hmm.
and he got that back. And then he tells Lewis he loves him, and Lewis is like, you don't say that.
Yeah.
And it's, a pretty common thing in like hetero romantic stories to be like, oh, this guy said I love you too early. Oh, that's so awkward. But when it comes to these characters, it's kind of awkward for another reason. It's a lot more emotionally complex
Mm-hmm.
because Lewis can clearly see that Joe wants to love someone, but he's not prepared to. He didn't come to this to find new love. He still loves prior Walter. So he's seeing that and going on like the back foot, being like, please don't say that. Like, we're just trying to, numb our feelings right now with a lot of sex. I don't want this like random businessman to feel like he's attached to me at all.
Yeah, I think I'm asking because it just gave me very conflicted feelings about Lewis. I was all for giving him the benefit of the doubt in the first couple episodes about just like how scared he is of seeing Pryor die in front of him. And I think that that's still a valid thing to give him, some forgiveness for. But, his whole plot is really just calling into question, like, what exactly is love, with the stuff that Belize says to him about, like, you're ambivalent, all your checks bounce, you're ambivalent about everything.
Yeah.
And then I don't know, I just feel really bad for Joe here because Lewis, like, Joe finds him in the park and is like, I followed you from work. And so Lewis knows like how like meaningful this is for Joe. And it sort of lets him think of it as something really meaningful and special. And then later is like, oh, by the way, it's not quite like that. So I don't know. I felt conflicted about Lewis's character in these episodes.
I think the play definitely wants you to feel conflicted about Lewis.
Yeah.
And he doesn't get, but it's more like, like you're saying, he doesn't get a redeeming moment in this episode by being like, oh, Joe, like I care about you too. And like, I can share my love with a lot of people or anything like that. The dude sucks. Like and I think there's a lot of value in having a character like that whose morals are completely off. Like his moral compass is just malfunctioning, it seems like, because he ran away from Pryor because he was uncomfortable and couldn't process like being around somebody who was dying, both physically and emotionally. And with Joe, he's kind of doing a similar thing where he's like, I don't know if I can commit to this either, to this guy who like needs some sort of companionship right now.
Yeah.
I would love if the story ends with them like becoming allies and friends and whatever, and let them like relegate that relationship to that and not like, have him break Joe's heart. But right now it definitely just feels like Lewis is rejecting every attempt at kindness that he's getting. And it's frustrating, especially when it's coming from Joe, someone who like truly needs a W right now.
Yeah. I'm wondering where this ends for Joe.
Yeah. 3 weeks, Magellan. 3 weeks they've been together.
Right. When his mom is in town, I guess he just forgot, and his wife is missing, and he forgot about that too, or something. He said he goes into Harper's vision, or Harper imagines him.
Yeah.
And he says like, she's like, oh, you found me. And he's like, well, I'm not really looking for you anymore. I'm just on an adventure. And it's this really sad moment where she's like, well, I want to see. And he says, no, you don't. You don't want to see what's happening.
My secret adventure.
Yeah. And so, I don't know. Like, this is obviously a really important moment for Joe, accepting this part of himself that he had denied for so long. But it coming with this, like, I think what's going to end up being a pretty shattering heartbreak is sad.
I think this has to end with Harper leaving Joe.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I think so.
Like, maybe she just goes to Washington or something. I don't know. She obviously can't take that job, but just to go somewhere, like to leave New York, because this is not a place that's conducive to her mental health also.
Yeah.
And you bringing that up is useful, that Joe is actually in her last dream here.
Mm-hmm.
We see in her final dream sequence that Mr. Lies is kind of dejected by the state of her fantasy now.
Yeah.
He's just like sadly playing the oboe in the corner, and she's like, I brought back this tree and I like bit it down with my teeth. Isn't that cool? I'm like a beaver.
Mm-hmm.
And he looks like not disturbed, but just like disappointed, exhausted or something.
Mm-hmm.
I had trouble getting a read on like what Mr. Lies is specifically is an interesting character I just haven't had a lot of I feel like I haven't had a lot of success like pinning down what his purpose is or what he's doing.
Yeah, it seems like, I mean, his name is Mr. Lies, right? So it seems like the whole point of his character is enabling you to sort of like live in denial or something like that. Like he arranged for Harper to go to this place that's totally separate from the rest of the world, isolated, where she can like live in this bubble and just deny the realities of her life. And the fact that he is brought into existence ostensibly by her drug use also seems to point to the fact that he's like not necessarily a healthy, helpful character. And when we come back to her in this vision, now there's like a street lamp and a bench and a fire hydrant in Antarctica, and there's pine trees. And he's like, why are you breaking down the delusion? Why are you destroying the lies that I brought you to? I thought this is what you wanted. I think that's kind of what I'm getting from it. And it's her arc is her being able to like accept the realities of her life as they are and not hide or run from them anymore.
And I think this is partly why I like her plotline so much, is that's kind of everybody in this series.
Mm-hmm.
Roy has to accept that he's dying. Pryor has to accept that he deserves to live.
Yeah.
And Lewis has to accept that he can still be with this person, or like he needs to either to move on or like commit to something.
Right.
Everybody has their like arc, and Joe needs to accept who he is and where he belongs.
And Joe needs to like be able to be himself without being defined by somebody else.
Exactly. Yeah. Be fully himself.
Yeah.
This sort of sad reveal here at the end of her vision, she's like, I wanted a real Eskimo, someone chilly and reliable. Instead I got or an Eskimo dressed in seal pelts, not this. Instead I got this guy, some lawyer. And it's Joe. And I love, again, imagining like just the actor playing Joe Pitt in the play walking on stage in this big fur coat being like, hello.
Yeah, this is another thing that's probably a lot funnier in like the staged version of it.
Yeah, they're just sitting on like a park bench and talking, and he's like, what's up? I'm the Eskimo. And like you said, he is like not allowing her into his life. He says it's scary fun what he's been through, and how it's not what she's doing isn't working for her anymore. And then it pulls out, and we realize that the cold is not just because she's in Antarctica, but because she is sitting in the middle of a park. She actually cut down a tree and burned it. Yeah. And the police are here.
Yeah.
I thought this was hilarious. I thought that the like, oh, you're like right next to Prospect Park. Just the like expectations versus reality. And also Jeffrey Wright plays a homeless man who says like, there's no Eskimo or there's no Eskimo.
Like I tried to tell you.
You weren't listening. That kind of makes it funnier.
Yeah.
Where it's like, what's the purpose of Mr. Lies? And Mr. Lies is just a guy who's like, you're weird. And then, the police come and get her. Do we see her again after this?
Not in this episode. I don't think we see Joe's mom show up at their apartment finally and answer the phone. And it's like, I guess the police station calling to be like, hey, we have her in custody or something. I think that's setting up for the two of them to have some kind of scene or set of scenes in the next chapter. But I don't think we see Harper again in this chapter.
You tell her Mother Pitt is coming, says Joe's mom. Like, also, I love that even in a pre-cell phones world, there's like the phone on the ground, and she has to like dig through trash to find the phone. Like, something very analog and fun, but funny about that.
Meryl Streep's characters, the mom and Ethel Rosenberg, are two characters where I'm kind of like, okay, I guess I get logically why they're here, but I don't know. They don't really mean that much to me, except for the fact that Meryl Streep is like hilarious and very good at playing them. Like the little bit where Ethel Rosenberg calls the hospital to get Roy Cohn taken in, and she's like, "Ooh, the phones have buttons now, and they sing." This is fun. Pretty amusing.
I think there's a couple of things. One, it's definitely really useful to have, like I was saying earlier, a little bit of levity in these stories, because they can get kind of so serious that it's like depressing and hard to watch a lot of. But also, I think the purpose of Ethel Rosenberg is to show Roy Cohn, like, this is, it's the ghost of Christmas past, right?
Yeah.
It's like, here's the thing in front of you that you did that died. And he has this, like, kind of weird friendship with her ghost. Like, he, when Pryor sees the Angel of America, he's, like, treating it the way that a human being would treat that, right? He's freaking out, not believing it, being like, don't hurt me. But Roy is, like, so used to hallucinating and has clearly thought about this ghost before. That he sees her and he's like, "Oh, what's up, Ethel? How you doing?" Like, just talks to her like she's an old friend who's stopping by to visit.
Yeah, and I guess I'm more so kind of like, it's weird, the arc with Joe's mom, and maybe that'll make more sense later. But yeah, Ethel Rosenberg's character definitely has a purpose, and I think she also serves to humanize Roy Cohn as he's being like a total ass to everybody. Just the fact that that's the person that he is envisioning says a lot about, like, he says that this was the proudest thing he's ever done, but really it's clearly like the thing he feels most guilty about, the fact that he murdered this woman through extra legal means, essentially.
Exactly. Yeah. But I want to get us to the Roy stuff, because I actually spent we don't see Roy for like a good chunk of this episode, and then we suddenly get a lot of him. Which I found to be some of the strongest writing and acting in this whole thing, especially in comparison to like some of the Angel stuff. But basically, like I was saying earlier, Belize is at the hospital. He's living his nurse life. Everyone's like, "Why don't you wear?" Or like when James Cromwell comes by in the middle of the evening, and it's like, "You're going to let this guy in, and you're going to find a bed for him." And he's like, "You don't tell me what to do." And he's like, "This guy's important. I can fire you." You get this picture that he's like comfortable in his job. He mentions later that he's union, so he can't really be fired. And then he meets Roy Cohn, and you kind of see him like look at the chart and be like, "You guys want him to get Roy Cohn? Like that guy's here, really?" And also, you guys want him to get radiation? You got to go to oncology. And he's like, "I know it says that, but I want you to put him here." And Blaze is so smart. The dude immediately is like, "I know what this means. I'm not stupid at all."
Right.
And so he meets Roy. He's trying to give him his basic treatment like any other patient, even though he clearly has a lot of contempt for this man, just from knowing him like societally. And Roy like shows vulnerability to Belize in a way that you don't get out of him unnecessarily. Up until like honest vulnerability. I think what he shows to Joe Pitt is like a very false veneer of vulnerability. And like a dark version of it, but But in these moments, you're getting him like at his most real. Like, I want companionship and I want people to listen to me and do what I say. I love this stuff. I thought Jeffrey Wright stands toe to toe with Al Pacino like it's no problem, and plays this type of nurse character in a way that feels so real and so accurate to real life. How you would play this. And so they're talking for a while about treatment. And Belize is kind of like, "I know what's your whole deal. I'm not going to James Cromwell you and tell you, like, why can't you just say that you're homosexual? I know you're not going to say that. But there's a couple things you need to be aware of with your treatment. Number one, don't sign anything that you don't read in full, because they're going to give you a double-blind trial and expect you to take a placebo, and you're probably going to die. And number two, what was the other thing? The other thing came first, and I don't remember what it was.
So, there's this moment where Roy Cohn is being so aggressive, and also saying, like, using the N-word, but then saying he's not a racist, and like all of this stuff. Anyway,
we got that 80s racism, baby.
Well, and also it's like a very kind of Trumpian thing too, of like speaking out of both sides of your mouth, kind of. But Belize, despite all of this, still has this feeling of like, I need to help this guy. And so the first thing that Belize says is, "Hey, you have sarcoma," I think is what it is. Like you have a tumor or something, or it looks, and they think you have cancer. So like they're going to treat it with radiation, but that's going to destroy your T cells, and you like barely have those.
Your immune system can't handle losing your last like two T cells.
Yeah. Basically. So he's like, "You need to deny the treatment that they're going to give for what you said that you have and figure out a way to get treatment for what you actually have, basically.
And also don't take the pills they give you because they're probably going to give you, because they think you're already going to die, they're going to give you the fake pills and then use you as a statistic. Right. I think it's incredible that Belize takes all of this racism and still chooses to be another angel in this story. You know, I still have that kind of like theory in the back of my head that all of the Jeffrey Wright characters are angels in their own right. And he says, well, I'm still going to help you because we still help each other. And I'm still also a nurse. And I have this like, this moral necessity to care for people. But that's challenged. And then he's the person who's challenged in these scenes later when Roy puts in a few phone calls because like the bad summary said, all he wants is a phone that he can put on hold or whatever. Gets a fridge shipment
of AZT.
Full of AZT, which is like one of the most, is again, according to How to Survive a Plague, the most expensive drug of all time at that time, ever. And he's like, yeah, I got like 30 bottles of it. And when Belize finds this out later, is so distraught and so mad that so many of his friends have died hopelessly because they can't afford this and because it's not being provided to them. And this fucking guy just here was able to put in a phone call and get it hand delivered to him on a silver platter. I think this is some of the sharpest like political commentary too that the miniseries has had so far.
There's there are a few really great lines that I wrote down or remember from this whole plot line. So first of all, the exchange after Belize tells Roy all of these things that he needs to keep in mind. And Roy says, "You hate me." Belize says, "Yes." Roy says, "So why are you telling me this?" Belize says, "I wish I knew." Basically saying like, I feel some kind of kinship or need to help you or some sort of empathy for you. And so I'm acting on that. Then Roy Cohn, when he's on the phone and talking to whoever's going to get him the AZT, says, "No placebos. I'm no good at tests. I'd rather cheat," is what he says there. And then the big moment for me in the big like kind of political criticism when Roy and Belize are talking, Belize is saying like, there are all these people, there's only like 30 people right now who really have steady access to this drug. And there's so many people who need it. And Roy Cohn says something like, "I'm not going to be swayed by the story of like the unequal distribution of resources. I don't care about that. That's just history. History made things that way. It's not my fault. I'm just, working within the system the way it exists," which is
shockingly common rhetoric, by the way.
And that's just the core like myopia of conservatism, really. This sort of failure to imagine a world that's different than it is now, or this acceptance of like, well, there's this limited pool of resources, and so I'm just going to hoard things for myself. When in reality, if we took a different view, like I was saying before, it wouldn't be a question of like hoarding and unequally distributing this resource, because we could just make more drugs and make better drugs. And it's not necessary. It doesn't have to be this like cynical zero-sum game that Roy Cohn is making it out to be, and that he's imposing on other people. And he like refuses to acknowledge his culpability in making this system the way that it is.
Because the end patient has no choice. Like, I've been watching, this is such a weird comparison, but I've been watching some Godzilla movies lately. And, those movies have a very explicitly, like environmentalist message about like, we can fight over resources and money as much as we want, but ultimately nature comes for everyone. It's like the core message of the whole franchise. And AIDS as a metaphor is like nature, it's just like, it's going to hit everybody, and whoever can treat it gets to live. But at the end of the day, we're all subject to it the same way. And Roy is just like, well, he's trying to make this argument that like, well, I'm also trying to keep myself alive like you guys are. I just happen to have all of it, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah, and I think it was the AV Club review I read that makes this point. But the value of Roy Cohn as a character in the context of this story is that he is a gay Jewish man dying of AIDS who has incredible contempt for anybody who is gay, Jewish, or dying of AIDS. And like,
as are many of the other characters in this story.
And he's someone who has the power to like materially affect those people's lives and his own life. But like totally denies that is his reality.
And the only gift he's willing to give is after he makes Belize so angry that they're shouting over each other and he's saying the N-word and Belize is yelling at him for being an old piece of crap. Finally, Belize calls him a slur that's used for Jewish people, and Roy smiles and goes, all right, you can have a bottle. Yeah. You can have one bottle. And it turns out once again, it's all about control. As long as I got you to like come down to my moral level, I feel fine giving you a scrap. Yeah. And immediately Belize just like takes it and leaves.
Well, and Belize, I think, to sort of reassert something there, it takes like 4 bottles.
Yeah. True. He's like, you're not going to stop me. Like, get up and try and stop me. Yeah, it's bananas. And then he throws him the keys back because the keys to the fridge. I think what makes this stuff so interesting too is that Roy now spends the rest of the episode talking to Ethel Rosenberg, mumbling out of the side of his mouth and just like writhing and dying. Yeah. The final scene of the episode, but just we'll roll back in a bit, but is him talking to Ethel and being like, yeah, America has no place for the sick and the infirm. I need to I can't be like this anymore. There's no support for me if I'm going to be like this. Just like there was no support for you, Ethel. You're a convicted traitor. And I hope you are having fun in Red Hell, which Red Heaven, excuse me, which I really wish I could go to Red Heaven with Ethel Rosenberg, but neither here nor there. And yeah, we're just gonna Roy's probably gonna be dead by the end of the series.
Oh, yeah,
if not next episode.
Sure. Definitely.
You know, it's no longer a question. He has the best treatment in the world, and he is still going to die. And it's just like watching a man collapse like that. It's sad, but also like kind of getting what's coming to him.
Yeah, I think it also positions us as it's sort of like a challenge to us as the viewers to ask us like, what sympathy does this man deserve? You know,
he's talking to a dead person that he basically led to being executed. He's dying from an illness that could have been preventable by systems that he's complicit in. And he's basically stole this medicine that could have been used in better places.
And
do you still feel bad? Do you still feel bad when he's dying? Like, I don't know.
And I think that is also what Belize is having to figure out for himself.
Yeah, exactly. Belize, and in that way, you say, kind of is like becoming a viewer substitute, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I could watch Al Pacino talk to a ghost for like 100 hours, dude. That's the thing, is that these scenes are so good, and it's very sad, but also like, there was a moment that, this is actually tied into the Prior Walters. I wanted to talk about the big funeral scene, but that interweaves itself with Prior Walters' excellent adventure, we could call it. So at the end of the last episode and the beginning of this one, Prior Walter is visited by Emma Thompson as the Angel of America, or Angel in America, whatever. And it's like you were saying, it's played pretty seriously at first. She's speaking with that big booming, like cinematic portrayal of an angel voice. And I don't know, can you give the sort of like brief summary of what this conversation is?
Sure. So I think, first of all, what is kind of confusing and important to think about is that Emma Thompson as the angel represents, or is not necessarily the same thing as what Lewis is talking about when he says like there are no angels in America.
Right.
Or it could be, I don't know.
She is an angel in America. She's not like the thing that he's talking about.
Yeah, because what Lewis is saying is like America has no past, really. Because he's like, oh, people who are Dutch, there's this idea of what it means to be Dutch. And in America, there's no such thing, which Belize disagrees with, especially on the grounds of race. Like there is a racial past in America that means something isn't just purely political. But this is like a much more kind of theological, philosophical thing that's happening with Pryor. And I think connecting it to politics is a little more complicated, but I'm going to make an effort to do that because there are actually like certain lines that there are also certain things that characters say that help make that connection. But Pryor's recounting to Belize this vision or dream that he had where he's talking to Emma Thompson, and
it's told out of order, right? It's like he tells him about it and says, I had a wet dream after my meeting with the angel. Yeah. And then it's after the funeral and after they talk in the park that he's like, here's what the conversation was.
Which I think is an interesting way to structure it. Because at first it's presented to you as if like he forgot what happened, but then it seems like actually no,
we're just going to show you the whole thing.
So essentially what Emma Thompson's angel character is telling him is that the sort of like fundamental difference between human beings and angels when God created humans is that he created essentially beings that could like change. And she says, I think I mentioned this in the first half, but she says, the virus of time began. And so she sort of sees this concept of like change in whatever form as being something bad, but also the core thing that kind of like attracted God to paying more attention to humans than to angels. And every sort of like substantial disruption or change on Earth causes a heaven quake in heaven. And Pryor says that heaven looks like San Francisco, except it's all like clouds and stuff. And so Emma Thompson's angel character is essentially saying like, you are a prophet who needs to make humanity stop moving, basically. Like it's eventually going to become impossible for human life to exist on Earth. And along the way, it's going to become completely unbearable. And so what humanity needs to do and what you need to do is just stop changing and stop moving. And what is kind of politically interesting about that is Pryor's basically like, fuck you to the angel, but also is like, well, but maybe that's valid. Belize sees that as him yearning to just have his life back and like rewind to before he contracted AIDS, basically. And he's manifesting that as this like weird angel thing. And then at one point, one of them calls the angel like a cosmic reactionary or something. Because it is a kind of conservative ideology of like, let's just stop things from changing, right?
Yeah, let's slow it down, guys.
So I don't know if this is what the play is going for, but it really seems like it's trying to figure out if there is such a thing as like a good conservatism. You know what I mean? Like, is there really such a thing as like core American values or something that we can hearken back to or anchor ourselves to and like stabilize society and like keep ourselves from going through bad change? And I don't know. It's interesting. So it ends up being this ostensibly leftist or liberal play, but that's really preoccupied with the concept of conservatism and if there's such a thing as like kind of a good conservatism. And I don't know if that's the right reading, but that's what I took from that, at least.
Well, I think reminding yourself that this was written in the 90s by a like presumably upper middle class white gay man, like helps that make sense. Like I know a lot of the sort of leftist perspective is like we have to accept that America doesn't have that. But that yearning for that and that desiring of that is valuable and is something that plenty of people have. It's not a unique view to this to Tony Kushner or whatever.
Yeah. But I think also to maybe not to overly analyze Tony Kushner because I don't know a lot of his work, but the fact that Tony Kushner also wrote Lincoln, kind of feels like that in a similar way where he's trying to locate something in America's past that is this like core thing that we can aspire to and be proud of and hold on to. Like that's what the movie Lincoln is about in a way that's almost dishonest about how abolition came about.
Right.
So I don't know. So I'm curious to see where the play like ends up with this concept.
Because can we like move forward while also accepting and like finding things to appreciate about America's past and its relationship to religion? I think that's the core of Pryor Walter's sort of story in this play, in this storyline. But the angel stuff, I mean, the blending of comedy and seriousness kind of is what makes this so difficult, I think, to analyze. Because meanwhile, she's like handing him these glasses that are like in a suitcase under his floorboards. And then she like has sex with him and Belize is like, you fucked an angel? And he's like, not exactly. She actually fucked me. And it's complicated. And, you know, it's the way that you describe like a fever dream to a friend. Like that's the whole joke here. And Pryor Walter is like walking around the funeral in a black cloak. Like, I guess I'm the messenger now. And it's like, this seems so silly, but it's got a serious thing.
Yeah. And there's this interesting thing too about like, and I think this gets at, the kind of core I don't know what it is. The core dissonance or like injustice at the heart of AIDS, which is that AIDS is sexually transmitted. And just this like inherent tragedy of, you know, how dangerous this like thing that you crave so much, or that some people crave so much and is so like can be so beautiful and special, is also could lead to your death. Because I don't know, like the angel is he describes the angel as being hermaphroditic, and she says she has 8 vaginas, and like it's clear that and then she lifts him from the ground and catches on fire and has sex with him. And so it's clear that like being sexual is core to these angels, and also core to this concept of like time not moving, because we sort of felt like it was weird that Lewis and Joe had been together for 3 weeks and we're like, what? But that, I think that's a quality that like being so wrapped up in someone else sexually can have, which it just sort of like freezes you outside of time almost. Right. And so there's something in that as well, that there is this tension between sex, which like almost feels like it exists out of time and has that quality, but AIDS being linked to that, which is this very much, as I was saying before, a virus of time that like takes its toll on you over the course of time. So I don't know. I'm sort of like half baking that notion, but it seems like both funny but also important that the angel is like so sexual.
Right. This is like a beautiful Emma Thompson.
Yeah.
Right? With the big wings and like naked when they actually do the deed and all that stuff. I love what you said there. Sorry, I like fell into your words for a second there to make it to be romantic for a second. But another moment in this episode related to that I felt like it was as if it was out of time was the funeral scene that initiates Prior Walter and Belize's conversation. So this is like kind of a pause. I'm so curious how they would handle this in the play, but they're at this beautiful funeral for a member of the gay community, I guess. With like an all-black choir and everybody's dancing and clapping, and there's a mix of like a bunch of religious type, like staunch like old white religious types, and like a bunch of trans folks and gay folks, and like it's just the whole community celebrating somebody's life at their funeral, and they have this like jewel-studded coffin, and then they like process out with like dancing and singing, and it's like it's so useful because like I was saying with the tenderness of last episode, there is joy in the 1980s, like being gay in the 80s, in addition to there being tragedy. It's not all we're dying and our boyfriends are leaving us. It's also like, yeah, and we still like, and there's an irony to this scene, right? Because this is somebody who died.
Yeah.
And it's very likely that they died of AIDS, but we're going to celebrate it because they can't take our joy away from us. I found this scene so empowering and like so valuable in an episode that's also about like, you know, accepting what your life is for and who like, kind of presides on you when you die and your relationship to God and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But again, it really just felt like it was like it sort of seems like it's dropped in, but the fact that it leads to Prior Walter and him talking about it, and that Prior Walter is like not into it because he's like, oh, this is like death again. They're celebrating death, and I'm over here terrified of dying. I'm wearing this black cloak and like thinking about the angel that I was with last night, and these people are clapping for a dead person. You know. America, it's full of contradictions, beautiful contradictions.
And he has that moment where he's talking to the nurse in the first episode about how he didn't want to attend a friend's funeral because it was going to be open casket, and he was worried he would get like the bird tuberculosis.
Bird tuberculosis, yeah.
Opportunistic infection that he died of. So yeah, there's the funerals and death have been a part of this from like the first episode.
Yeah. No, we're keeping it's very consistent in that way. But actually, I think that's basically all the scenes that I wanted to talk about. I know we kind of like danced around, but the angel stuff is definitely the highlight of the episode. It's definitely the one that I'm like, if you're not watching this, you got to watch the scene because it's bananas in a cool way, and worth a deeper read. I'm so invested in Prior Walter's storyline at this point. I think it's standing out as maybe my favorite so far.
Yeah, definitely.
Did we even get a ton of Lewis in this one?
Just Lewis.
I guess we got
Joe,
him with Joe.
Not really him by himself, I don't think.
Yeah.
I think we're gonna see him.
I don't know. I want to
talk to Prior again at some point soon.
God, I would hope so. I would really hope so. But yeah, that's I think what we got. Did you have any stray notes about this episode?
Not really. I don't quite know what to make of. Another thing that the angel says is that the San Francisco earthquake of 1906 was like the moment that God left heaven and abandoned the angels. And it's like, okay,
yeah,
all right, sure. Not sure what to make of that. And then Belize's response to that is he says, abandoned, I smell a motif. So basically say to Pryor, like, this is you thinking about Lewis abandoning you.
Again. Yeah.
So I guess we'll see what happens with that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I had one line that I really liked that we didn't mention when Pryor Walters is describing the angel being with him. He's like, you had sex with her? And he's like, wait, are you going straight on me? And he's like, no, she was a different kind of woman, or she's not a conventional woman. And then he goes, Grace Jones, which is incredible. Yeah. Big Grace Jones fan here, TBH. But yeah, that's what I had. Great pair of episodes, great show, really into it. Gonna cry some more. I didn't actually cry too much this episode. I did a couple times in like episode 3. But episode 4, I was mostly like furiously taking notes and Googling things like, I need to understand this.
Yeah, it felt very like English class, my approach to these two, as opposed to the first two that I think I felt those more.
More emotional. Totes.
Yeah.
But we're finishing Angels in America next week, Magellan. Specifically, we're watching episodes 5 and 6, which are the last 2 parts of Perestroika. I'm very excited to see where this concludes. I think we decided off mic that we're not going to read the summaries for these ones out loud on the episode.
Yeah, I think I don't think it adds anything to, like, there are some shows where it's like, ooh, get excited about this weird plot, but this is just kind of telling you what the plot beats are for 5 and 6, and
yeah,
I don't think that we need to read those on the pod.
But yeah, we're finishing Angels in America next week. I'm really excited, and that's what that is. Let's take it to the plug zone. Shake off the English class vibes and talk about the fun vibes. Like, hey guys, thanks for listening to Chats. If you would like to email us questions, comments, or concerns, check out chatspod@gmail.com. That's CHATZPOD@gmail.com. We also have a lovely Twitter account over at Chatspod over on there. You can find updates about the show, and you can also get in touch with us there. We have a subreddit that's community run. It's reddit.com/r/chatspod, where every week we are re-listening to old Chats episodes with the listeners and talking about behind the scenes stuff, reminiscing, laughing about stuff, thinking about what we could fix and change, or how we've changed. Right now we're listening to Avatar: The Last Chatspender, which was our 3rd season, way back in 2017, and we're having a great time. I do, as always, want to encourage people to rate us on Apple Podcasts or your podcast platform of choice, because we are really trying to get our name out there and make it big in the podcasting scene. People want to hear our funny voices. If you'd like to support us financially, we have a Patreon that is replete with bonus content. It's patreon.com/chatspod. I'm moving my hands around as if I'm performing in a play right now. Patreon.com/chatspod. $3 a month gets you all sorts of content. We hang out, we talk about things. We did a really great quiz recently, a gamer personality quiz. I don't think that should actually be out by now. Is that correct? That was last month. Yeah, so our recording schedule is a little weird. This one's being recorded in advance as well. But that was a lot of fun. We also have pilot chats where we pilot shows and decide if we want to chat them. If that wasn't self-explanatory. And Magellan is doing a solo watch of the X-Files over there called the Chatz Files. So for a couple dollars a month, you get all sorts of bonus Chats goodness, and you can help us pay the bills. It's so nice of you. Please support us. Thank you. We also have, instead of personal plugs, our final segment on the show here is called Chatsums, little snacks for you to enjoy between this episode and the next one, where we recommend things for people. So, Magellan, can you go first? Can you tell the folks what your Chatsum is for this week?
This is a game that just came out this week for us. So for all of you, this is maybe a month and a half late of a recommendation, but I've been really enjoying a brand new Battle Royale game that is free to folks who have a Nintendo online subscription. It's from the people who make Tetris 99 and who made the lovely Mario 35 before that was taken off the thing. It's called Pac-Man 99, and you play Pac-Man competitively against 98 other people and try to be the last Pac-Man standing. And I've been having fun with it, so I would recommend folks with a Switch check it out.
I like it. Pac-Man 99, it's fun. I like Pac-Man. If you like Pac-Man and you want to play in a different weird way, it's a little bit more complicated to me than like Mario 35, or especially more than Tetris. They've like, as they've put more of these out, they all get like one extra degree of complicated. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, you're still playing the game and trying to play it well with some added flourishes that make it competitive. So that one's dope. I have a quick Chatzum, quick shout out Chatzum. So for reasons I can't reveal in case one of my friends listens to this show, we're going to be seeing I'm going to be seeing Godzilla versus King Kong in the near future. Once we're all vaccinated and ready to like see a movie again. So in preparation for that, I've been going down the rabbit hole of the MonsterVerse this past week, which is the series of films in the franchise that leading up to Godzilla versus Kong. I've watched Godzilla 2014 and a couple minutes of Kong Skull Island so far. The third film in that franchise is Godzilla King of the Monsters, which I've seen clips of, and it looks dope. I'm ashamed to say it, I've never seen a Godzilla movie before. I know I would like them. I know that the 50s one holds up very well, and it's like on HBO, and I should just watch it. But I watched Godzilla 2014, and it gets the Allen seal of approval because it's cool. It's kind of sick. Basically, the criticism it got in 2014 was like, Godzilla's not in it for 45 minutes, and then they show up for like 10 minutes of the whole movie. And it's because it's not like, you're not here to see Godzilla. It ends up being about the people. Bryan Cranston's a major character in it. Some of the characters aren't as fun as him. He's kind of like the best performance of the movie. It's iffy in terms of like the human characters, but when it does finally get to like Godzilla fights a bunch of other monsters, it do be sick as hell is the thing. It's like quite sick. And it gets the Allen seal approval. And I've heard Kong Skull Island is much sillier and much more fun. And there's a big monkey, and he punches people. So the MonsterVerse overall gets the seal of approval from moi. And hey guys, I just like put my arm on my table as if I'm like Mr. Rogers, you know? Hey guys, don't do drugs. Thank you to Magellan for being the rock to my hard place. And thank you for listening to this episode of Angels in Chatzmerica. Peace.